This morning I started the message last Sunday, and this is the second half of it. So I'll do just a real fast recap. What we're talking about is about patience. Would you say that out loud? Patience. And three things, just in the quick recap here, three things about patience. Number one is this: patience is something you already have, whether you know you have it or not, if you have been born again and accepted Jesus. You have patience. Where'd you get it from? God put it in you at the new birth because you were born of God. And it's called this, it's listed in what the Bible calls, when it lists the DNA of God, it's called the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, and then that next word is long-suffering, which is in the Greek, it's actually the word patience or endurance. So when you said out loud, God, help me out, God has given me endurance, supernatural patience. Now, why would he give you that? Because as long as you and I live on this planet, we have to have patience in our life to not lose our mind. Matter of fact, Jesus actually said that. He said, in your patience, you will possess your soul. Your soul is the part of you that thinks and reasons and hears stuff and sees stuff. He said, in your patience, you'll take possession of your mind or your soul. In other words, if you don't exercise patience, there are days, sometimes longer than days, there are times you will lose your mind. Has anybody ever been around someone that they say it this way: my patience has just run out? And when their patience run out, how many of you know it's just a little bit of a nudge? You just always give a little nudge and you will make them lose their mind. And if they lose their mind, there's going to be collateral damage. Anybody ever been with somebody who lost their mind? Anybody married to anybody? I'm never mind. And they even warn you. Don't you're on my last nerve. You about used up all the patience I have. Well, the truth is, God gave you patience so that you could do well in life. So he's already given me patience. Number two is I have to exercise patience if I'm going to experience God's completion in my life. It's necessary for me to have what God wants me to have in life, because God's got a big plan for your life. He's got great things for your future. For you to enjoy that, walk in it, and have it, you're going to have to exercise patience. Number three is this: with patience is how I receive God's promises. With patience is how it's necessary for receiving God's promises. And we read a verse last week that in the book of Hebrews it says, follow those who through faith and patience receive the promises of God. We read another verse in the book of Hebrews that says this. It says that you have need of patience, so after you've done the will of God, you can receive the promise. So I can actually do the will of God, and if I don't exercise patience, I can miss out on the promise that comes from doing the will. And then we ended up over here in the book of Job, chapter 1, is where we stopped, and we were just getting ready to go with him. And the reason we were going to the book of Job is because James chapter 5, it tells us this in verse 10 and 11. It says, remember the Old Testament prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Take them as examples of patient endurance under suffering. Take them as examples of patient endurance under suffering. Then it uses a word in the next verse that the first time I saw this, it sent me on a quest to find out why in the world would the Bible say this. Because the next verse is going to talk about, it says, when we look back at those Old Testament prophets who lived in times where times were brutal. And it says, look at them as examples of endurance and patience under suffering. Then the next verse says this. It begins to talk about being happy. And it says, behold, we count them happy which endure. And then it gives the person that the Bible names as the happiest person, the example of the happiest person in the entire Old Testament. And it says this: We count them happy which endure. You have heard of the patience of Job. You've heard of the patience of Job, seen how the Lord provided, you know how the Lord provided for him in the end, for the Lord is full of mercy and compassion. I grew up in church. My earliest memories are being in church. My parents were Christians before I was born, and so they raised me in church. I never heard of the patience of Job, ever. I heard about Job is suffering. Job was identified with suffering. Anytime someone was going through a terrible time or a tragedy, they would always quote verses from Job. If I went to a funeral, that it wasn't, there's some funerals that you have as a pastor, I and a minister, I've been the officiant and spoken for funerals and been the one responsible for funerals. Had people ask me whenever I go, please do my funeral. And there's some funerals that, to tell you the truth, they're happy funerals. They're the ones where somebody lived and they're in their 90s. They died happy. Their family's there. It's just beautiful. And we're also thrilled for them because they went to heaven. It's great. Then there's other funerals where it's tough because their life ended in a tragedy. It was a horrible thing. It was a loss that everybody's a loss when they leave this earth for the people that love them and all. But there's others where it was such robbery. It should never have happened. And so when it comes to Job here, it says we count them happy who endure. You've seen the end of the Lord, how he provided for Job in the end. So now back to the book of Job, chapter 1. Job chapter 1, verse 1. Say it out loud. Here's the happiest guy in the whole Old Testament. Now I say, here's the happiest guy in the entire Old Testament, according to God. Again, he's famous for suffering. He's famous for tragedy. But in heaven, he's famous for being happy. And it was because he used patience. So Job chapter 1, verse 1. It starts off with this. It just tells you about the man, what his heart is. There was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God, he respected God, and he stayed away from evil. Then it tells you about his family. He had 7 sons and he had 3 daughters. Then it gives you a financial report on Job. It says he owned 7,000 sheep, so he's in the wool and textile industry, 3,000 camels, that's over the road and long haul trucking, 1,000 head of cattle, he's in the beef and milk industry, 500 donkeys, that's local around town UPS FedEx delivery. He also had a large number of servants, so a lot of people are depending on him to do well because they work for him. And then it says this about him. He was the wealthiest man, the richest man in the East. So there's a snapshot of Job's life at that point in time. The next few verses from verse 6 all the way down through verse 12, it says that Satan came before God and God said, have you noticed my servant Job? There's nobody like him in the land. Now, here's a couple things that we talked about last week, but I want to reiterate them. To know this about Job, because you're about to have literally all hell break loose in Job's life. But Job, know this, God didn't do that to Job. Here's the background on this. One thing to know is this. Job is the oldest book in the Bible. It is the first book that was ever recorded in the Bible. The book of Genesis was written after the book of Job, although the book of Genesis, which was written by Moses, the book of Genesis talks about in the beginning. We know it talks about things that happened before Job, but we know Job happened after in the beginning, because if he'd have been before the beginning, he'd have been the beginning, but he wasn't before the beginning. He had to be after the beginning, because before the beginning, you didn't have anything but the beginning. And the beginning was coming up before the beginning, because we hadn't got to the beginning yet. Right? Okay. Now, so Job, he lived, though, before Abraham did. Now here's why Abraham's so important, is because God made a covenant with Abraham, and that covenant made where God said, if you'll be my man, I will be your God. And if you'll give me all that you have, I will give you all that I have. And I will give you, part of what I will give you is, he said, I will defeat your enemies and I will protect you, and I'll put protection around you. And I'll cause you to prosper. And I will, and God goes on and makes all these promises, but they included protection. And we see that in Abraham's life as he goes through his life. Job lived before Abraham. There is no mention in the book of Job anything about Abraham or any mention of the covenant. It just talks about Job's relationship with his God. So Job didn't have the protections of the covenant God made with Abraham, which, by the way, that covenant became what we call the old covenant. We live under phase 2 of that, the new covenant, because Jesus came and completed that old covenant, gave us the new covenant where we have better promises and a better everything with God, where we go from being his servants to being his children. We go from being the folks that work for him to the folks that are in his family. And we were elevated where Jesus set us right beside him at the right hand of God. Okay? So we've got it better than anybody in the Old Testament had it, and they had it better than Job had it. So Job, Satan says, God says, look at my man Job. And then Satan says this, and immediately it tells you, even before Moses' time, before the covenant with Abraham, which happened over 400 years before Moses, before Abraham's time, it lets you know some things about what God's will is and what the devil and hell is angry about. Because neither one of them has changed. God loves you. God restores you. God heals you. God blesses you. God sets you on high. God makes a way for you. God redeems you. God rescues you. Satan hates you. Hell hates you. I really am at a loss how anyone could ever be a quote-unquote Satan worshiper other than you're just dumber than dirt. Why would you worship somebody who just can't wait to roast you over an open fire? Because they're going to be in the open fire too. Now, back to this. So Satan says this to God. He said, Job respects you, and yeah, he fears you, but there's a reason why. And Satan says to God, you built a wall of protection around him, and you have blessed everything he has, and this is what ticks the devil off. He says, the devil says to God, you have made him rich. And so from the very beginning, you find this out. God delights in prospering his people, and hell is mad about it. And so God says back to Satan, look, everything he has, there's not a wall of protection there. You can attack him. God doesn't say, go attack him. He just says, this is the situation. And then God says, but don't you touch his life. You can't do that. So it says Satan leaves, and the very next day, the world falls apart for Job. Job chapter 1, verse 13. Job 1, verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house. Now he's got 7 sons and 3 daughters, so all 10 of his kids are at the oldest brother's house. A messenger arrived at Job's home with this news. Your oxen were plowing, that's the heavy equipment part of his company. The donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabeans raided us. They stole all of the oxen and all the donkeys. They stole all your animals, and they killed all the farmhands. And I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, he hadn't got to finish his story yet, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven. Now, it wasn't the fire of God, but people have a history of anytime something happens that's too big to blame it on a person, they blame it on God. I mean, we still do that today in our culture. We all see it in our insurance stuff. That you can buy insurance for a whole lot of things except for an act of God. And yet I got Jesus saying the devil came to steal, kill, and destroy. God didn't come to do that. I got God telling me every good and precious gift comes from the Father of lights. All right? But people don't know, so they say stupid stuff. All right? Now, while he's yet speaking, another comes and says, the fire of God's fallen from heaven, burned up your sheep and all the servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he's still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels. Remember, there's several thousand camels, and killed all the servants, everybody that works for you. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting at their oldest brother's home. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness, hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. And I can try to imagine, but I know I can't imagine the shockwave that went through Job's heart and through his mind. Everything in his life has just been destroyed. The only thing he's got left is his wife. And she's not pleasant. Because the next day when he wakes up, she looks at him and says, why don't you just curse God and die? They don't have a lot of cards with that on it, but you go to the card shop and they got birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, curse God and die. Oh, let's see those. But and so Job's in shock, and he's in grief, and he's overwhelmed. And so he says this in verse 21. In verse 20, it says he tore his clothing, ripped his robe, shaved his head, and said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I'll be naked when I leave. Well, how many know that's true? I mean, granddaughter came last night. How many know, lovely granddaughter? If it had been a lovely grandson, all of us came into this world. None of us was wearing a t-shirt for any particular college. Our pro football team, right? We came in all the same way, naked. And when you leave here, they'll dress you up, but the real you, it leaves and goes. Matter of fact, if you go back and dig up somebody who's already been deceased a number of years, the clothes are always still in the box, right? So Job was accurate in that one because he'd seen people live. He knew that babies come into the world, they're not clothed. He knew that when people die, they don't get to take their clothes with them. And then he said this. He said, the Lord gave me what I had. Now that's the truth because he lived through it. But then the next statement he makes is one where he makes a statement out of ignorance. Ignorance. Everybody say ignorance. Ignorance. He said, and the Lord has taken it away. Blessed be or praise the name of the Lord. Well, we'll find out in a little bit because God's going to come on the scene and say, I did not take it. But Job said he did. Now, here's the thing to understand about the Bible. Everything that is recorded in the Bible, it is true that it occurred. But everything that is recorded in the Bible is not true. I'll say it again. Everything that you see recorded in the Bible, they recorded truly what took place and what was said. But everything that was said was not the truth. I'll give you the big example that's just a real fast one, and that is, if the whole Bible, because I run into people and say, well, everything in the Bible is true. Everything in the Bible is true. Everything in the Bible is true. Well, if everything in the Bible were true, then Jesus was able to cast out devils because he was the prince of the devils. Because that's in the Bible. But Jesus said the guys that said it were wrong. And that they were actually of their father, the devil. So it was said, but what was said by stupid people. Okay? Now, let me give a quick thing on ignorance, all right? Ignorance. This actually happened. My wife and I, we've been married for 41 and a half years, and I've learned a lot about what to say and what not to say. And right now I should probably just keep my mouth shut, but I'm out of town, so I'll tell you. Within the first year of us being married, we got to talking about, I don't remember what it was now, but it came to a point in the conversation where my wife said something about something that she just wasn't aware of what was really going on. And so she was saying something that wasn't accurate. So to let her down gently, I said, "That's okay, you're just ignorant." Now, if there's anyone here who plans to be married in the future or would like to stay married, please look at my scar tissue. You just don't want it. And so she looked at me and she said, "Are you saying I'm stupid?" I said, "No." And then I said this. I said it. I said, "I see that you're just ignorant of what the word ignorant means." I know. Y'all caught the part about I've learned a lot, right? I wouldn't repeat that. I mean, again, I'm repeating it, telling you, but now, see, I'll tell you, even me telling this story has blessed somebody, probably a husband, because they'll go out and get in their car today and say, "See, he was dumber than I am." You got the jackpot with me, hon. Okay, so, but ignorance just means you don't have knowledge. Stupid is when you know what to do and you know how to do it and you just don't do it. You stupid. You know what to do, you know how to do it, you don't do it. That's also the definition of a fool. They know what to do, how to do it, they don't do it. Stupid. Fool. Ignorant. I just don't know. But I've noticed this. Ignorance, not knowing what's going on, has never stopped people from having strong opinions. You walk into any place, name any subject, and say, "Hey, anybody in here got an opinion about?" And throw it out there. And people who have no idea what it even is will say, "I'll tell you what I think." And you'll find out they're ignorant people. And that's when you can hand out the t-shirts and say, "Here, you're the champion today, ignorant." Now, y'all know I'm just making junk up, right? Don't do that. That's why the next verse says this: "In all this, Job did not sin by blaming God foolishly or being stupid." He was blaming God out of his ignorance. Now, here's the thing about it. You and me, the main way we have available to us to know God is through his word. We have his Bible, right? Do you know what Bible Job had? There wasn't one. He's the oldest book in the Bible. Everybody's going to go to school on him. So Job makes the statements he does, but he doesn't. He knows God only through his relationship with God and what's happened so far. Now, Job chapter 2, verse 9 is where his wife said, "Are you still trying to maintain your dignity? Just curse God and die." We come all the way over to Job chapter 3 and verse 1, 2, and 3. In Job, he had 3 friends that came to comfort him, was what they said. And their names were Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad. Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad. This morning, I noticed that this wonderful new granddaughter is here. They gave her a biblical name, Esther. It's a beautiful name. But I've yet to run into anybody who says, yeah, this is my son Bildad, my other son Zophar, and down there is Eliphaz. Biblical names we don't use. And so they sat there for 7 days, and it said Job said nothing. And they just sat there with him and said nothing. And then finally Job spoke. Now, for the next 37 chapters, there's going to be a whole lot of stuff said that God's going to give commentary on it in chapter 38. God's going to tell you what he thinks of the 37 chapters. These are the 37 chapters that are always quoted at disasters, funerals, and terrible things that happen in life. Here's one. Does everybody know that God is, I'll say it this way, he's pro-life? In other words, he wants you to have life, right? Okay. Now here's the thing. By the way, God is also, please understand, I'm not talking politically, I'm just talking God. God is pro-choice in the sense that he gave every one of us a choice. You don't have to go to heaven. You can go to hell if you want to, and he will protect your right. But he'll urge you, don't do it because I love you. But you have a choice. He said, this day I set before you blessing and cursing, life and death. And then he gave us a clue on what to pick. He said, therefore, choose life. So God gave us choice, but he's for us having life. When we come to Job chapter 3, verse 1, you have 3 verses where I'm surprised that some political group hadn't picked up on this. These are 3 verses in the Bible that are pro-terminating a pregnancy. These are 3 verses in the Bible that it is for terminating a pregnancy. Who said it? Job. What'd he say? Let's read it. At last Job spoke and cursed the day of his birth. He wished he'd never been born. He said, let the day of my birth be erased. And then he backed up 9 months and he said, in the night that I was conceived. He said, I should never have been born. We go on and Job says a bunch of other stuff. We don't have time to read all of it, but it's amazing stuff. Job chapter 10, verse 10. Well, in Job 10, the first 1 and 2, Job's screaming out to God. He said, I can't stand my life. I hate it. I'm putting it all on the table, all the bitterness of my life. I'm holding nothing back. And Job says, here's what I got to say to God. Don't bring a verdict of guilty on me without letting me know what the charges are that you've charged me with. And then you get to chapter 10 and verse 10, and Job, he says, have you not poured me out like milk and curdled me like cheese? It's a bad day. In Job chapter 12, Job's had it with his 3 friends because his 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, after they sat and listened to Job blaming God, they turned around and blamed Job. They said, Job, we know you're having a bad time. Having a bad time? He lost everything he's got. His kids are dead. Everything's gone. He's just got the curse God and die, partner. And they said, Job, whatever reason all this is happening, just know this. You deserve it to be twice as bad as it is. Great friends, huh? And so Job said to them in chapter 12, verse 1, Job answered and said, no doubt, this is to his 3 friends, but you are the people, and wisdom shall die with you. In other words, no doubt, the 3 of you guys, you are all the wisdom there is on earth. And whenever you guys die, wisdom will no longer be on the planet. But then you come to this in Job chapter 13 and verse 15. And you see a heart with God, how Job's heart is. Job thinks God's killing him. God's not killing him. God's not his problem. But Job thinks he is. And yet Job says this in Job 13, verse 15. Though he slay me, talking about God, though he's killing me, yet will I trust in him. But then he throws in the last part about himself. He says, but I'm going to maintain my own ways before him. I'm going to tell him what I think. He said, but even though I think God's killing me, I'm still going to put my trust in him. Now, I'm going to give you three things that are actually worth, if you're a person that writes stuff down, these are three things that are actually worth writing down, okay? It's the three different kind of choices all of us face, and three different kind of choices we all make. One is the choice of the moment. The choice of the moment. We make those all day long, the choice of the moment. You know, you'll make 100 of them before the night comes, right? The choice of the moment. The other are choices for a lifetime. Choices for a lifetime. Lifetime choices for the rest of my life. And then the third kind of choice is this: eternal choices. Eternal choices. So choices of the moment, choices, lifetime choices for a lifetime, the rest of your life, and then eternal choices. Now, when in the best way for it to work, it would be this. Whatever your eternal choice is, see, for me, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. I want to honor God, and I want to know God, and I want to spend forever with God. So when I'm 5, I made an eternal choice. I didn't even know I was making an eternal choice. I just knew something was pulling my heart. And so at 5, I answered an altar call and gave my heart to Jesus. I made a choice that was going to affect eternity. And then for my life choices, that influenced the rest of my life choices, because now if I'm going to spend forever with God, I want to honor God. So I want to make my life choices where they're honorable to God. Make sense? So I made a life choice, you know, the biggest choice you probably make. And that was, when I got married, I made a vow to Debbie, and she made a vow to me, and thank God both of us kept our vow, and we have and we will, and that was, I will have you and you'll have me, and we said this, till death do us part. It was a choice for life. And to honor that was easy because we both had made the choice to have God and have God influence our life choices, lifetime choices, right? But then you have choices in the moment, like telling your wife, oh, you're just ignorant. Those are the ones that you better have your heart stuff right, because your head got messed up and then your body says something stupid. And those are the choices of the moment are the ones that may they only affect the moment so I can get forgiven before the sun goes down. Now, Job has just had life throw everything in the world at him. And we're hearing all the stuff he says in the moment. Now, let me say it this way real quick on those choices. Made the choice for eternity with God. Then you back up with that with lifetime choices. I'm currently 66 years old. Here's the thing I know about myself. One thing I know about myself. I was really avid with exercise, working out, weightlifting, all that kind of stuff until I was probably around 56 or 7. Now, not so much. And I know this about myself. I will never again, ever, for the rest of my life, till death do I part, I will never again exercise and do the kind of stuff I did back before I was 55 and younger. I'll never do it again. Now, my whole plan of exercise and all is, because I take my mama, I take care of her, she's 88. I take her to Hardee's every single morning, and I sit at a round table that through the week, there'll be 20 to 25 people that are regulars from 85 to 93 years old. And I get to listen to them. And they all, I know from being with them, getting old is not for sissies. You better be tough. And so from talking and getting to hear them, now I have a total different outlook on what I'm going to work out for. I want to do stuff so that I still have my own knees and my own hips and my own ankles, and I want my shoulder joints to be okay. I want to be able to move and actually bend down and pick up my granddaughter without going, watch out, we're going over. And so now, since I'm not going to work out and do the stuff that I used to do, now I've made a choice, a choice for the rest of my life, that I've got to weigh less. Because at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of this year, I weighed too much. Which was better, because I used to weigh 3 much, but I weighed too much. So I went over and I got on the ladder and climbed up on the scale. And then I stood there a second and I went, so I could see the number. And that caused a prayer to come out that started like this: oh my God. So I made a choice for the rest of my life. I've got to get that number down to where I don't weigh too much, I just weigh too okay. So, I had a number in mind for by the end of this year, and I'm about 25 pounds towards that number. But now we come back to the choices of the moment. And man, I've had days where I've done good on those, and I have other days where I sinned and fell short of the glory of God. I've had days where it's like, oh, I'm going to start again tomorrow. And that's how life is, those daily choices. It's like, I got a target I'm aiming for, but some days I just don't get it quite right. But God still loves me. Here we go. Now, here's the thing. Job, he says a lot of stuff on the day-by-day stuff here, but the man still keeps his heart towards, I trust God, even though he says some terrible things about God. Now, we come all the way over to Job chapter 38. Job 38. And after 37 chapters, and you can go through and read them sometime, it's 37 chapters of saying the most horrible stuff and saying God did it. Then you get to Job chapter 38, and God comes on the scene. Now, by the way, remember we started this off quoting that verse in James chapter 5. We count them happy which endure. You've heard the patience of Job. So the happiest guy, when the Bible's going to name one person as the happiest person there was, it points to Job. I haven't seen happy yet in this. Have you? Have you? I haven't. So now we come to Job chapter 38. We've had 37 chapters of saying how horrible God is and how horrible my life is. I wish I'd never been born, wish I'd never been conceived. And in Job chapter 38, God comes on the scene. And you find this so often when God talks to his people, it'll say he uses a still small voice. But Job is so down the road here, it says, this time it says, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. That's a tornado. A tornado will get your attention. Still small voice, you might miss it sometimes. Whirlwind, tornado. The Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, now look at verse 2. Here's God's commentary on the first 37 chapters of Job. God says, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Let me paraphrase. God says, I just listened to 37 chapters of ignorant people giving their opinion. And then God says, hey, Job, stand upright and put your britches on. Put on your big boy pants. King James, he says, gird up thy loins. He said, because you've been saying I'm the problem, and if you're so filled with information that you can come to the conclusion that I'm your problem, then I'm going to ask you some questions about creation that'll be very easy for you to answer. So God says in verse 2, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man, and I'll question you, and you'll answer me. Then verse 4, he asks a very simple question for somebody who's got so much knowledge they can blame God for how their life has gone off track. He said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. And then he didn't even give time to answer. He just goes to the next one. He said, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. God's being sarcastic there. Surely you know. And who stretched the line upon it? Everybody know we've got the line that stretched around the earth. You know, it's an imaginary line, but it's real there. It's the equator, right? Who stretched that? Who decided the measurements on that? You know what Job said? I'll know. He goes on and asks him 2 chapters of questions. And Job finally gets a chance. God just takes a breath. And Job says this. Because what he does, he just points out, Job, you don't know anything, and you obviously don't know enough to blame me. And you're blaming the wrong person here. And then Job says this, when 2 chapters later, chapter 40, he said, Job says, I've spoken once, I have spoken twice. King James English, he says, but I shall lay my hand upon my mouth. I'll southernize that for all of us who we know this language, but we may have folks that moved here from other parts of the world. Job said, well, shut my mouth. I done spoke and I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, shut my mouth. And God said, oh, no. We're going to ask some more. And God goes on and asks 2 more chapters of questions. You ought to read the questions sometimes, because you and I, we don't know the answers to them either. Because God's the one that made stuff. I love it now that our technology has gotten to the point that we have telescopes that are sending pictures that are light years away from the earth, what they're photographing, that they could never see before. And every time I see those galaxies that we've never seen, all this, I look at that and I go, oh, that's the road that goes to my home. Because I go to live with God one day. So then you come to Job chapter 42 and verse 10. Job 42, verse 10. When Job prayed for his friends, so he had to pray for the 3 guys who had not been helpful. He had to forgive them. That same principle goes all the way through the Bible. You come over to the New Testament, and Jesus says, look, when you pray, forgive if you have aught against any, so your Father can forgive you. He said, your faith, it works by love, and love always forgives. That principle's always been there with God. So when God tells him, look, you need to forgive your friends and pray for them. So Job does. When he does, it says, the Lord restored his fortunes. In fact, it says, verse 10, the Lord gave him twice as much as he had before. Now, let me come all the way over to verse 16. It goes through and just gives an accounting of all the stuff, including he has a new wife, he has more children, his daughters now. The Bible goes in to point this out. He has 3 daughters in this new family, and it says they were the most beautiful young ladies, most beautiful women in the entire world. And he had 7 more sons. And it says he goes on to live to see 4 generations of grandchildren. Then we come to verse 16. Job lived 140 years after that, living to see 4 generations of his children and grandchildren. Then he died, an old man who had lived a long and full life. So after everything, it says he lived 140 years. God restored his fortunes, restored his family. He got to see his descendants all the way to 4 generations. And he died old, living a full life. Now, for anyone, here's the other thing that Bible scholars agree on, which is not that many things they agree on. And that is that the terrible stuff in the book of Job, when everything fell apart until God came on the scene and talked to him out of the whirlwind and turned everything around, that terrible stuff, it lasted probably for 9 months. At the very longest, it lasted 12 months. So somewhere between 9 months and 1 year was where everything was horrible. Prior to that, because it says that happened in the first half, it says the first half of Job's life, the next says the second half, he lived 140 years. Well, if the second half was 140 years, the first half would have been 140 years, right? I said, if this happened in the middle of his life, and it says the second half of his life, and if the second half of his life was 140 years, which the Bible tells us it was, then if that's the second half, wouldn't the first half be the same as the second half in time? Right? Makes sense? So he lived 140 years, then everything fell all apart, and then God restores him, he lives another 140 years. For anybody, because I've met Christians who they think, because they've had it tough, and they have had really horrible times, they think God did it to them too. He didn't do it. And so they can't wait till when they finally get to heaven, there'll be somebody there who can relate to them, and they can't wait to see Job, because Job is famous for suffering. And they can't wait to run up to Job in heaven and say, man, I had a tough life just like you. Let's just sit and have a glass of water and talk to each other about how hard it was. And Job's going to say, how hard it was? What are you talking about? I lived 140 years with God, and I was the wealthiest guy in the world. I had all this stuff going. And then after it was all over, I lived another 140 years. And God made me twice what I had before, and I only had a bad year. I just had a bad year. What kept the guy sticking with God through that? He chose to have patience and to endure, and that says, God, I don't understand stuff, but I'm going to stick with you. And you find this out about God. When you decide you're going to stick with God, God will figure out a way to get the answer to you, to lift you out of whatever you have fallen into, jumped into, or been shoved into. God will rescue you. All you got to do is say, Father, I'm sticking with you. I don't know everything. I ain't got all the answers, but I'm going to stick with you, and I trust you. I know you will get to me, and you will help me, because you're my God, and you made me your person. You made me your child. I'll read this last thing of Scripture to you. It's in Romans chapter 5, verse 2. Verse 1, I'll read verse 1 through 5. Therefore, talking about us, being justified by faith, so it's talking directly to Christians, to us, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom also, because I'm in him, I'm in Jesus, by whom also we have access. We have access by faith. Faith is your access key, your access card. It is, the numbers to the combination lock. By faith into this grace. Grace is God's just given me everything he's got. He's made it available to me. We have access by faith into this grace wherein we stand. It's mine right now. That's what I'm standing in. And we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also. Now, how can we glory in horrible times? It says, knowing this, knowing that tribulation, when I get thrown in the middle of situations that, man, I've been in them. I do not want to be here. And sometimes they lasted way longer than I ever wanted them to last. And if somebody had asked me, how did you get in this spot? I'd have said, to tell you the truth, I don't know. Sometimes I got into those spots because one of the terrible things I've done in my life is I have trusted people I should not have trusted. Anybody ever done that one? And I had other people tell me, don't trust that person. I thought, oh no, they're good. And they weren't, they were bad. That's been one of the big things that's caused me having pain in my life. But I went ahead and stuck with God. And it says, therefore, not only we glory in tribulations, also knowing that tribulation, it does something. It says it causes you, it worketh your patience. It literally says it makes your patience work out. And if your patience exercises, does weightlifting, does strength training, does the running and the sprints, when your patience does that, you know what it does? It gets stronger and tougher, and you endure stuff, and it doesn't even bother you after a while. It says, knowing this, we glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation works patience, and patience gives us something. I've got something now I didn't have before. I have experience. And it says that experience gives me something else. It gives me hope. Now, you know what that lets me know? It says, in hope maketh not ashamed, because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, which is given unto us. When it says that tribulation works patience, which gives us experience, which gives us hope, which makes us not ashamed. Let me say it again. Tribulation, it works patience, which gives us hope. Tribulation works patience, which gives us experience. The experience gives us hope, and the hope makes us not ashamed. Let me go through it again so make sure I got it right. First one, tribulation comes, right? Somebody said, what do you have to do to have tribulation? Be alive on the earth. Okay? Tribulation, it says, we glory in that because I've got access by faith into all that God's given me, the grace, into His grace, everything He has. Tribulation, it works my patience, my endurance. And that causes an experience me to have, so I can look back and I have experience. I can look back and say, oh, I've been here before. It says that experience causes me to have hope. And the hope makes not ashamed. Here's what I'm here to tell you this morning. That experience is this. You go through hard times and you use your faith in God and you stick with Him, God, and you have to use patience, you have to endure, because sometimes it just don't all happen overnight and get fixed overnight. It'll give you experience. You know what that experience is? It is the experience of winning and being delivered. Because that's the only kind of experience that'll give you hope. Because if all your experiences are getting defeated, you see it in any sports team. When I was early 20s, I'm out in Oklahoma, and one of the ministers on staff there, he asked me, he said, hey, I want you to help me. He was a coach. I wasn't a coach, but I had played soccer in high school, and the high school team I won was on way back in the day. They had won the state championship in South Carolina. So he knew I knew about the game and I'd played the game. And so he had a 12-year-old son who had a soccer team, and they were the team in that little league at that age. They had never won a game, ever. And everyone else made fun of them. And so that was a team we got, and his son was on that team. So we went out, and he inspired them. I did the stuff I knew to get them to learn to play the game. And they went out that year and they won half of the games they played. And by the end of the year, those guys, when they walked out, those 12-year-olds, when they walked out on the field, they'd look at the other team and they said, we know we got a good shot at beating them today. And so we're going to go out and fight. So you know what happened? They had gone through hard times. But they had patience. What was the patience? They showed up to try it again. And then, because they had somebody helping them and coaching them and somebody else telling them what to do and showing them how it works, they had the experience of, hey, we found out what it's like to win. And you know what that gave them? Hope. And you know what the hope did? It made them where they were not ashamed to show up. In life, we all go through tribulation and stuff. God doesn't send it. God wants to get us out of it. But to do it, we have to exercise our faith, and then let your patience have a workout. And you will win, and you'll get the experience of what that looked like, And that experience will give you hope. So the next time you find yourself in a situation like that, or you know somebody in a situation like that, you know this: I'm going to end up coming out of this. Let me tell you what I know to help you come out of this. And at the end of this is, and hope it maketh not ashamed. Because God's love, his love for me, he's already made everything available to get me up and over. Now, today, I'm going to stop now. But here's what I want to do today, all right? Today, we've got the normal things that we do with just church on Sunday morning. And Sunday mornings are more regimented than any other time all of us do church, all right? So I'm going to ask them to come up and take this and go ahead and just dismiss everybody and whatever. Everybody needs to leave. You go ahead and go about your day, and have a wonderful day. But then there are people who came here this morning for prayer and to have the power of God minister to them, for God to do a miracle in them. So we're going to give a moment for folks that need to leave to go ahead and to do that, all right? But then, and if you stay in the room, please just be respectful that there are people who are coming here for a miracle today, and I'm going to be down here to minister to them. And so if you would, if you normally would stay in and talk and stuff, that's a wonderful thing to do. But just for this moment, I'm asking if you do that, not in this room, but outside in the hallways or whatever. And let's just be respectful, because there's people who came here today for a miracle. And we have the God who gives miracles. And God especially uses me in that area, and I'm thankful for it. So I'm just going to go ahead and be a pipe, all right? And so that's going to take place as soon as dismisses. I'll be right down here, and anyone who needs to be ministered to, please come down here. Just meet me down at the front, and we will meet you and meet God. Thank you.